The story of ancient China begins where water and earth meet, along the wide, winding embrace of the Huanghe. For millennia, it has been called a name that speaks not only to its physical nourishment, but also to its role in shaping the imagination, identity, and destiny of one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Yellow River, Mother of China. Imagine standing at its banks thousands of years ago. The water, colored by rich loess soil, glimmers with a golden hue as the sun rises, painting the plains in soft light. This river carried silt from distant highlands, laying it gently across the flatlands, renewing the soil with fertility each time it spilled over its banks. Life was fragile, but also abundant here. The earliest settlers, drawn to the river's promise, built their homes of packed earth, small clusters of dwellings that rose above the floodplain like hopeful islands. They sowed millet, a hardy grain that thrived in this climate, and tended to pigs, dogs, and chickens. Over time, they learned not just to survive, but to shape a life in rhythm with the river's cycles. But the river was never tame. Floods would roar unexpectedly, sweeping away homes, crops, and lives. Droughts would crack the earth, starving fields of their lifeblood. The Yellow River earned another name, China's Sorrow, for its unpredictable temperament. Yet in its danger lay resilience. Generations grew accustomed to rebuilding, to trusting in renewal after loss. This gave early Chinese communities a spirit of endurance, a recognition that human strength is not found in resisting nature, but in learning to live alongside it. Evenings by the river were filled with warmth. Families gathered around small fires, listening to elders tell stories about the river's moods. Stories of kindness when waters fed the fields, and warnings when waters rose too high. These tales carried lessons: to respect the forces greater than oneself, to prepare for change, to see life as a cycle of loss and renewal. From this rhythm of the river, the seeds of a worldview emerged. Harmony was not imagined as the absence of struggle, but as the balance between calm and storm. Just as the Huanghe both nourished and destroyed, so too did life carry both joy and hardship. Early Chinese philosophy, from the idea of yin and yang to the search for balance in every aspect of life, found its roots in this environment. The Yellow River was more than a body of water. It was the first teacher, the first mirror, the first whisper of civilization in China. It reminded people that life's beauty lies not in permanence, but in flow. As the river shaped the land, stories shaped the people. Every civilization needs myths of origin, tales that transform uncertainty into meaning, that remind listeners why their world is as it is. Along the Yellow River, such myths became the first threads of Chinese identity. Among them was the story of Yu the Great, a hero born of flood and persistence. Long ago, the river raged without end, drowning fields and villages. Many tried to control it, but failed. Then came Yu, who did not try to stop the water with walls or barriers, but instead learned its ways. He carved channels into the land, guiding floods back to the sea, letting water flow where it wished rather than forcing it. Legend says Yu worked tirelessly for years, passing his own home without stopping, refusing rest until the waters calmed. His sacrifice saved the people, and in gratitude, he was made their ruler. From him came the Zhou dynasty, remembered as China's first. The tale of Yu the Great is more than a flood story. It speaks of a philosophy that true power comes not from domination, but from harmony with nature. It reflects the idea that leadership is not merely command, but service. Yu became the archetype of the virtuous ruler, one who listens to the world's rhythms and adapts, rather than fights blindly against them. Other myths told of cosmic beginnings. Some spoke of Pangu, the giant who separated heaven and earth, his breath becoming the wind, his blood rivers, his body the mountains. Others told of Nuwa, the goddess who shaped humans from clay, repairing the broken sky with colored stones when disaster struck. These stories carried themes of creation, resilience, and care, binding human life to the greater cosmos. By the river, people began carving symbols onto bones and shells, small marks, the earliest forms of writing. They were questions cast into the silence. Will the crops grow? Will the floods return? Will the ancestors protect us? In these fragile scratches, we glimpse the earliest attempts to record memory, to speak to the unseen. At night, villagers lay on mats woven of reeds, gazing up at skies dense with stars. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light above, mirroring the Huanghe below. They traced patterns and constellations, giving names and meanings, linking heavens to earth. Perhaps, like us, they wondered about destiny, about what forces lay beyond the visible world, shaping water, wind, and fate. These myths and practices were not separate from daily life. They were woven into it, making every flood, every harvest, every star-filled night part of a larger story. The river gave them water, the myths gave them meaning. Together, they created a civilization's first heartbeat. Homes were built from packed earth, strong enough to withstand winds, warm in winter, cool in summer. Families rose at dawn, tending animals and preparing fields. Millet stalks waved in the breeze, while rice paddies reflected the sky like glass. Children played barefoot in the mud after summer rains, chasing one another while elders watched with quiet smiles. Food was plain but sustaining. Porridge made from millet, steamed vegetables, and occasionally fish caught from the river. Families gathered on woven mats, sharing meals in quiet gratitude. What little surplus they had was offered to ancestors, a reminder that life was not only for the living. Community was strong. Villages were bound by rituals that gave rhythm to life. The rising sun was greeted with offerings, harvests celebrated with song and dance, ancestors honored with incense and prayer. To them, there was no division between sacred and ordinary. Planting a seed, pouring a cup of water, or lighting a fire was as much ritual as prayer. The river remained at the center. Its floods, though feared, were also anticipated, for they brought fertile silt that renewed the land. To live by the Yellow River was to accept impermanence, to understand that destruction was never the final word. Renewal always followed. Over generations, these small settlements grew into something more. Tools became more refined, writing began to take form, myths gave way to dynasties. But the essence of those early lives remained: reverence for ancestors, respect for nature, and resilience before change. The cradle of the Yellow River was thus not only the birthplace of China, but also the birthplace of its soul, a soul that saw beauty in balance, meaning in continuity, and eternity in the flow of a river. And so, as these early settlements grew, myth and memory gave rise to what we now call the first dynasty, the Xia. A dynasty that rests on the border between legend and history. The Xia dynasty holds a unique place in China's memory. It is spoken of as the first dynasty, yet it exists at the threshold between legend and history, a place where myth flows into archaeology, where stories whispered for centuries still linger in fragments of earth and bone. For generations, the Xia were remembered in texts written centuries later, especially in the records of the grand historian by Sima Qian. He described the Xia as a ruling house that emerged after the Great Flood, founded by none other than Yu the Great, the hero who tamed the waters of the Yellow River. But for much of modern history, scholars debated, was the Xia truly real, or merely a tale to give roots to China's long story? Archaeology has slowly shifted that question. In Henan province, excavations at Erlitou have revealed urban remains, palaces, workshops, ritual bronze vessels, dating to the period traditionally assigned to the Xia. While evidence remains debated, many see Erlitou as the shadow of the Xia dynasty itself, rising from myth into history. The ambiguity itself is telling. The Xia's place in China's imagination shows that history is not only about proof, but about continuity. To the Chinese people, the Xia mattered because they represented the idea of a beginning, a dynasty born of virtue, carrying the lessons of Yu's sacrifice into governance. Yu the Great stood as the archetype of moral rulership. His tireless labor against the floods, his devotion to people over self, his humility before nature. These qualities became the foundation for the belief that rulers must embody virtue. Power was not divine right alone, but a responsibility earned through service. This moral underpinning is the seed of the mandate of heaven, which would later define Chinese political thought. Even in its earliest whisper, in the legend of Yu, we find the principle that rulers hold authority only when they serve justly. The Xia dynasty thus symbolizes the dawn of political philosophy in China. Whether entirely real or partly mythical, it represents the moment when human communities began to see themselves not only as villages or clans, but as a society tied together under one leadership, a vision that would ripple through millennia. As you drift with these stories, you might reflect, where in your own life do myths and memories carry truths deeper than facts? Though details remain scarce, fragments of archaeology and tradition let us imagine life under the Xia. Communities clustered near fertile plains of the Yellow River, their survival rooted in agriculture. Millet and wheat grew in the north, rice in the wetter south. Farmers plowed with wooden tools, sometimes tipped with early bronze, harnessing oxen and human strength. Crops were stored in clay jars, meals shared communally, families bound together not only by blood, but by ritual. The rise of bronze marked a quiet revolution. Bronze axes, spears, and ritual vessels were forged in smoky workshops. These vessels, adorned with patterns of animals and clouds, served more than practical purpose. They were used in sacrifices to ancestors and spirits, linking the human world to the unseen. At the center of Xia society was the clan. Families traced lineages, honored ancestors, and looked to elders for wisdom. Ancestor worship was not superstition, but a world view. The living were threads in a tapestry woven across generations. To forget one's ancestors was to tear the fabric of identity itself. Rituals structured life. A marriage was not simply two individuals joining, but two lineages intertwining. Births were celebrated not only for the child, but for the continuation of the family line. Death was accompanied by reverence, ensuring that the departed spirit remained part of the household's strength. Evenings may have echoed with drums, with chants rising into starry skies. Firelight flickered against earth walls as people sang songs of work, harvest, and prayer. Villagers believed themselves surrounded by spirits of sky, river, and ancestors. To live well was to maintain harmony with these unseen forces. In this setting, Yu's legacy lived on. The Xia's claim to power rested on the idea that they, like Yu, could harmonize the forces of nature and society. Rulers were guardians of balance. Their role was not only military or political, but profoundly spiritual. Thus, while the Xia may not have left towering monuments like the pyramids of Egypt, their quiet strength lay in shaping a worldview. That community, ritual, and virtue formed the foundation of civilization. The Xia dynasty's greatest legacy is not in monuments of stone, but in memory and meaning. Later dynasties, the Shang, the Zhou, spoke of the Xia with reverence. For them, the Xia were proof that civilization had roots, that their present was tethered to an ancient lineage. This continuity gave legitimacy, grounding rulers in a story larger than themselves. The Xia also symbolized the fragility of beginnings. Their dynasty, as remembered, lasted centuries but eventually weakened, overtaken by the Shang. Stories tell of corruption in the final Xia rulers, of indulgence and neglect. These tales, whether literal or symbolic, served as warnings. When rulers lose virtue, they lose the right to rule. Here we see the embryonic form of the mandate of heaven, the belief that dynasties rise and fall not by chance alone, but by moral rhythm. When rulers serve with justice, heaven grants them favor. When they turn corrupt, heaven withdraws it, and signs appear in floods, famine, or rebellion. This idea would shape China's history for thousands of years, guiding the cycle of dynasties. Today, archaeologists still sift soil in Henan, uncovering shards of pottery, traces of bronze workshops, and patterns in ancient ruins. Each discovery pulls the Xia closer from myth into history. Yet even if we never find complete certainty, the Xia's truth remains. They remind us that civilizations begin with stories. Stories give shape to memory, turn floods into lessons, rulers into archetypes, and communities into nations. The Xia live not only in history books, but in the very structure of Chinese identity, as the first step in a journey that never ended. The Xia dynasty thus rests between worlds, myth and history, poetry and archaeology, and in that liminal space lies its enduring power. For it shows us that what begins in story can outlast stone, and that to remember is itself a kind of immortality. And as the Xia faded into memory, a new dynasty rose more firmly, the Shang, who left us bronze ancestors and the first written voices carved into bone. After the Xia faded into legend, the Shang dynasty emerged with firmer ground beneath its feet. Lasting from around 1600 to 1046 BCE, the Shang is often considered the first dynasty of China with clear historical evidence. Through archaeology and artifacts, their world speaks to us across 3,000 years, shimmering with bronze, alive with ritual, echoing with the voices of ancestors. The Shang heartland lay along the Yellow River Valley, where fertile soil fed fields of millet and wheat. But unlike the quieter beginnings of Xia, the Shang left behind grander signs of power. Palaces and walled cities rose, supported by complex administrations. Armies wielded bronze-tipped spears and chariots pulled by horses, a mark of both strength and sophistication. Most striking was their mastery of bronze casting. While other cultures hammered bronze into shape, the Shang perfected piece mold casting, a technique that allowed for vessels of astonishing size and beauty. Massive cauldrons, wine vessels, and ritual cups were decorated with intricate designs, dragons, tigers, owls, swirling cloud patterns. These were not everyday objects, but sacred tools of connection between humans and the divine. To see a Shang bronze is to see both power and prayer. They were used in rituals of offering to ancestors and gods, filled with wine, grain, or animal sacrifice. Their weight and beauty reflected the might of the rulers, but their purpose was always spiritual: to honor the unseen, to seek guidance, to sustain harmony between worlds. Bronze was also used for weapons, swords, spears, arrowheads. In the hands of Shang warriors, bronze meant dominance. Chariots thundered across battlefields, driven by teams of horses, carrying archers and nobles. War, ritual, and rulership intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Through bronze, the Shang proclaimed their identity. They were a people of artistry, spirituality, and strength, bound together by the conviction that to rule was to mediate between heaven, earth, and the ancestors. As you listen, you might reflect on what objects in your own life, a family heirloom, a gift, a tool, carry meaning beyond their material form. If bronze was the body of Shang civilization, then ancestor worship was its soul. The Shang believed their ancestors remained present in daily life, influencing harvests, weather, battles, and the fate of the dynasty itself. To neglect them was dangerous, to honor them was essential. Rulers acted as mediators between the living and the dead, offering sacrifices to maintain favor. This relationship with ancestors was not abstract. It was recorded in the most tangible way. The oracle bones. Oracle bones were ox scapulae or turtle plastrons, carefully prepared for divination. Questions were carved into their surface. Will it rain tomorrow? Should we launch an attack? Will the child be healthy? A heated rod was applied until the bone cracked, and diviners interpreted the cracks as answers from the ancestors and spirits. The king himself often led these rituals, seeking guidance not only for personal matters, but for state decisions. Afterward, the question, the cracks, and the outcome were inscribed on the bone, creating the earliest known form of Chinese writing. Thousands of these oracle bones have been discovered, their inscriptions forming the foundation of Chinese script. These fragile pieces of bone carry astonishing intimacy. They reveal concerns that feel both ancient and familiar. The hope for rain, fear of illness, uncertainty of war. They remind us that beneath the grandeur of palaces and bronze vessels, the Shang people shared our same anxieties, turning to the unseen for comfort and clarity. Through oracle bones, writing itself became sacred. Each character was more than symbol. It was a bridge between human voice and ancestral ear. Over centuries, this script evolved into the Chinese characters still used today, carrying with them the weight of history and memory. The Shang also believed in a supreme deity, often referred to as Shangdi. Unlike later conceptions of heaven, Shangdi was less a moral judge and more a powerful ancestral figure governing fate and natural order. Yet even Shangdi was approached through ancestors, reinforcing the idea that family was the root of spiritual life. Ancestor worship extended beyond royal courts. Ordinary families honored their departed with offerings at home, lighting fires, pouring wine, speaking names so they would not be forgotten. In this way, every family mirrored the dynasty itself, a small kingdom of memory, bound together by reverence for the past. Beyond bronzes and oracle bones, what was life truly like for the Shang people? Archaeology offers glimpses, walled cities, workshops, farms, and burials that reveal a society at once complex and deeply human. The Shang capital at Anyang held palaces, temples, and royal tombs. Beneath the earth lay chariots, weapons, jade ornaments, and even sacrificed animals and humans, offerings meant to accompany rulers into the afterlife. These burials show the Shang belief that death was not an end, but a continuation of life in another realm, where the same wealth and power were needed. Society was hierarchical. At the top stood the king, who combined political, military, and spiritual authority. Below him were nobles, warriors, and artisans, each with their roles in sustaining the dynasty. Farmers formed the foundation, cultivating millet, wheat, and rice, raising livestock, and supporting the grand rituals of their rulers. Artisans were highly valued, especially bronze workers, jade carvers, and potters. Their skill was both practical and spiritual, shaping vessels used in the most sacred of ceremonies. Jade, in particular, symbolized purity and immortality, and was often buried with the dead. Daily life, however, was not all grandeur. Families lived in modest homes, cooking over clay stoves, weaving cloth, caring for animals. Women likely played central roles in household management, weaving silk and hemp, preparing food, raising children, and participating in rituals. The Shang worldview was deeply cyclical. Life and death, harvest and famine, joy and sorrow, all were seen as part of an eternal rhythm. Rituals were the tools by which people aligned themselves with this rhythm, ensuring balance between the living, the ancestors, and the natural world. The dynasty's decline came, as so often in history, through corruption and overreach. Later tales speak of the last Shang king, Zhou, as a cruel and indulgent ruler whose downfall justified the rise of the Zhou dynasty. Whether exaggerated or true, the moral is clear. When rulers lose virtue, they lose heaven's favor. And so, the Shang passed into memory, but their gifts endured. Bronze artistry, ancestor worship, oracle bone script, these became pillars of Chinese civilization. The Shang remind us that even in the ancient past, humans lived not only for survival, but for meaning, weaving ritual, art, and memory into every aspect of life. And as the Shang fell, the Zhou rose, bringing with them a powerful idea that would shape Chinese thought for millennia, the mandate of heaven. The Shang dynasty, rich in bronze and ritual, eventually reached its twilight. Stories tell of its last king, Zhou, a ruler who grew distant from virtue, indulging in extravagance and cruelty. His court became a symbol of corruption, his rituals hollow, his concern for his people lost. And so, as often happens in history, the dynasty that once seemed eternal began to crumble. From the west rose a new power, the Zhou clan. They were a people of the Wei River Valley, hardy and disciplined, steeped in both farming and martial traditions. Their leader, King Wu, and his wise regent, the Duke of Zhou, built alliances with neighboring tribes, slowly gathering strength against the Shang. In 1046 BCE, they struck. At the Battle of Muye, the Shang army, weakened by discontent, collapsed. The Zhou claimed victory, and with it, the right to rule. Yet what made the Zhou remarkable was not only their conquest, but the philosophy they used to justify it. The Zhou declared that the Shang had lost the mandate of heaven. Heaven, they argued, was not bound to one dynasty forever. It was a moral force, watching over rulers, blessing them only so long as they governed with virtue. When rulers became corrupt, heaven withdrew its favor, and the people were justified in seeking new leadership. This idea transformed Chinese political thought. Power was no longer the permanent gift of ancestry or conquest. It was conditional, dependent on morality and justice. Rulers held authority not for themselves, but as custodians of harmony between heaven and earth. The mandate of heaven explained not only why dynasties rose, but why they fell. Droughts, floods, rebellions. These were not random misfortunes, but signs that heaven was displeased. The people could look at suffering and see it as a message. The time for change had come. For the Zhou, this philosophy legitimized their victory. For China, it became the guiding rhythm of history. Every dynasty to follow, Han, Tang, Song, Ming, Qing, would claim the mandate of heaven, and every fall would be explained as its loss. The Zhou had given China a profound gift, a political vision rooted not in force alone, but in moral balance. As you listen, reflect on how in your own life, authority and trust are often tied not to power alone, but to virtue, to the quiet strength of doing what is right. The Zhou understood that power required more than armies. It required order, both cosmic and social. To achieve this, they placed rituals and hierarchy at the heart of governance. The Zhou kings ruled as sons of heaven, not as gods themselves, but as mediators between heaven and earth. Their authority rested on performing the proper rites, seasonal sacrifices, ancestral offerings, ceremonies that honored heaven and sustained cosmic balance. By leading rituals, the king reminded his people that order on earth depended on harmony with the heavens, but this order extended into society itself. The Zhou established a feudal system, granting lands to loyal nobles in exchange for allegiance. These lords governed their territories, collected taxes, and provided soldiers when called upon. Beneath them, farmers tilled fields, artisans crafted tools and ritual objects, and families sustained the rhythm of daily life. This hierarchy was not seen as oppression, but as reflection of the natural order. Just as heaven ruled over earth and ancestors over descendants, so too did kings rule over nobles, nobles over families. To live well was to fulfill one's role with virtue and respect. The Zhou emphasized li, ritual propriety, the practice of respect in every gesture. From bowing to elders, to offering wine to ancestors, to conducting royal ceremonies, li gave structure to life. It was not about empty formality, but about living with intention, recognizing that every act could reflect harmony. The influence of ritual reached deep into homes. Families honored ancestors at small altars, parents taught children respect, marriages and funerals were conducted with reverence. In these acts, the same principles that guided kings also guided commoners, a vision of life where the sacred infused the everyday. The Zhou also nurtured the flowering of philosophy. It was during their later period, the Eastern Zhou, that thinkers like Confucius, Laozi, and Mozi emerged, each interpreting how order and virtue should shape society. This intellectual blossoming became known as the 100 Schools of Thought, a legacy born from the Zhou emphasis on moral governance. Through hierarchy, ritual, and philosophy, the Zhou gave China not just rulers, but a worldview. They showed that civilization rests on balance, of heaven and earth, ruler and subject, ancestor and descendant, form and spirit. The Zhou dynasty endured for centuries, the longest dynasty in Chinese history. Yet, like all dynasties, it too faced decline. Over time, feudal lords grew powerful and independent, weakening central authority. The dynasty split into Western and Eastern Zhou, the latter marked by the turbulence of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Still, even in its decline, the Zhou shaped the soul of China. The mandate of heaven became the lens through which every dynasty understood itself. Natural disasters, rebellions, corruption, all were seen as heaven's judgment, urging rulers toward virtue or signaling their fall. This philosophy gave Chinese history its cyclical rhythm, turning politics into a moral narrative rather than a series of conquests. Ritual propriety, li, continued to shape society, later codified by Confucian thinkers. The idea that order begins at home, in the family, in gestures of respect and daily rituals, became central to Chinese life. Harmony was not enforced by law alone, but by culture, by a shared belief in the importance of balance. Even in the arts, the Zhou left their mark. Bronze vessels of the Zhou carried inscriptions that recorded history and honored ancestors. Poetry flourished, with the Book of Songs preserving folk songs, court odes, and hymns that reveal both the grandeur of kings and the tenderness of daily life. These poems, of harvests, marriages, longing, and ritual, show us the humanity of Zhou society, grounding philosophy in lived experience. The Zhou also opened the door to a golden age of thought. As their power waned, thinkers rose to ask, how should society be governed? What is the role of virtue? How can humans live in harmony with heaven and earth? These questions, born in Zhou times, still echo across centuries. Thus, the Zhou's legacy lies not only in ruling for 800 years, but in shaping the framework of Chinese civilization. They taught that rulers are accountable to heaven, that rituals bind humans to the cosmos, and that philosophy is as vital as politics. When we look back, the Zhou dynasty appears not only as a historical period, but as a teacher. It reminds us that true strength lies not in conquest alone, but in meaning. It shows us that civilizations endure not just through power, but through ideas that give power its purpose. And in the wake of the Zhou, as lords and kingdoms fought for dominance, new voices rose, philosophers whose wisdom still guides the world. Next, we listen to Confucius and the gentle way of order. Beyond dynasties, bronze, and kings, the true story of ancient China lived in the daily rhythm of its people, the farmers, artisans, mothers, fathers, and children who sustained civilization with quiet constancy. Most people in early China lived in small villages, scattered across the valleys of the Yellow River and the Yangtze. Their homes were modest, walls of packed earth, thatched or tiled roofs, earthen floors smoothed by years of footsteps. Smoke curled upward from clay stoves, carrying the scent of millet porridge or freshly steamed rice. Life followed the seasons, as it always does where farming is the foundation. In spring, families sowed millet, wheat, or rice, bending low into furrows dug by wooden plows drawn by oxen. Summer meant long days of tending crops, chasing pests, and watching the skies for signs of rain. Autumn brought the great harvest. Fields turned golden, families working together to gather grain into baskets, storing it in jars sealed against winter. Winter slowed life. Fields lay fallow, fires burned longer, and families turned inward, weaving cloth, repairing tools, and telling stories to pass the cold nights. The cycle of the year was not only agricultural but spiritual, a reflection of heaven and earth's eternal dance. Children grew up in this rhythm, learning by doing. A boy followed his father into the fields, carrying water, leading animals, learning the feel of soil in his hands. A girl worked beside her mother, spinning thread, weaving cloth, preparing meals, learning rituals of respect and care. Life was education, not through schools, but through practice, observation, and tradition. Meals were humble but nourishing. In the north, millet steamed into bread or boiled into porridge. In the south, rice became the staple, its cultivation demanding but rewarding. Vegetables, beans, and fruits supplemented diets, while meat was rare, reserved for festivals or sacrifices. Yet even in simplicity, meals carried meaning. Bowls placed before ancestors, first portions offered to spirits, gratitude whispered before eating. What stands out in these villages is continuity. Families lived not for themselves alone, but as part of a lineage. A farmer plowing his field knew he was walking the same ground as his father, his grandfather, and his ancestors stretching back through time. His labor was not only survival, but devotion, a way of honoring the past and preparing for the future. The dynasty's rise and fall may have echoed far above, but here in the fields, life flowed with steady rhythm, eternal as the river itself. As you listen, you may think of your own daily rhythms, the simple acts of eating, working, resting. How might these small rituals connect you to something larger than yourself? If the fields were the body of early Chinese life, the family was its heart. A household was not just parents and children, but often included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, an extended family bound under one roof. Each member had a role. The father guided, the mother nurtured, elders advised, and children learned. This structure reflected the cosmic order itself: heaven above, earth below, ancestors behind, descendants ahead. At the center of the home was the hearth. Here meals were cooked, stories told, offerings made. The hearth fire was both practical and symbolic, a flame of warmth, continuity, and sacred presence. Families gathered around it not only for sustenance but for connection. Rituals shaped family life. Each dawn, children bowed to parents or grandparents, a daily reminder of respect. Ancestors were honored with incense, food, and prayer, their names spoken so they remained present in the family's memory. Weddings were celebrated not as personal unions alone, but as bonds between lineages. Funerals were solemn, ensuring that the departed joined the ancestors in peace. These acts were not burdens, but anchors. They gave families a sense of belonging across generations, linking the living to the dead, the present to the past. In a world where floods, droughts, and wars could shatter stability, these rituals offered continuity. Women's roles, though often overlooked in ancient records, were central. They managed households, prepared food, spun and wove cloth, and taught children the values of respect and harmony. Many also participated in farming, their labor essential to survival. While society placed men in public leadership, women sustained the daily rhythms that made life possible. Children grew up surrounded by lessons. They learned patience from watching crops grow, resilience from seeing families rebuild after floods, reverence from rituals at the hearth. Through play, work, and story, they absorbed the worldview of their ancestors, that life is harmony, and harmony begins at home. Festivals brightened this life with moments of joy. At harvest, villages gathered to celebrate, drums beating, songs rising, lanterns glowing against the night. Laughter mingled with prayer as people gave thanks to both heaven and ancestors. In these moments, life was not toil alone, but community, beauty, and celebration. Thus, the family was more than a unit of survival. It was a universe in miniature, a school of values, a sacred circle that reflected the greater cosmos. Beyond farming and family, early China was also a land of crafts and community. Villages hummed with the work of artisans. Potters shaped clay into jars and bowls, their surfaces smoothed and fired to hold grain and water. Weavers spun silk from cocoons, a craft unique to China, producing threads finer than any in the world. Blacksmiths and bronze workers forged tools, weapons, and ritual vessels, their skill both practical and sacred. Markets emerged where villagers traded grain, cloth, pottery, and livestock. These gatherings were more than economic. They were social, places of meeting, story, and song. News traveled along these networks, binding villages together into broader communities. Life was not without danger. Floods could sweep away crops, droughts wither fields, bandits threatened safety. Yet communities endured, bound by cooperation. Neighbors shared tools, worked together in fields, supported each other in times of loss. In unity, they found resilience. Spiritual life extended beyond ancestors to the natural world. Mountains, rivers, trees, and stones were seen as alive with spirit. Offerings were made to local deities, prayers whispered to rivers before crossing, songs sung to the sky in gratitude. The world was not divided into sacred and profane. All was alive. All was connected. Travelers sometimes carried news of distant lands, along paths that would one day become the Silk Road. Stories of strange fruits, animals, and people drifted into villages. Though most never traveled far, they knew themselves part of a larger world, woven together by rivers and roads. Daily life in early China was thus a tapestry. Fields of millet and rice, hearths glowing with ritual, families bound in respect, artisans shaping clay and bronze, festivals lighting the night. It was a life humble in material wealth, yet rich in meaning, continuity, and connection. When we speak of dynasties and philosophies, we must remember these people, the countless villagers whose labor and love formed the foundation of Chinese civilization. They may not have written their names on oracle bones or ruled kingdoms, but they sustained the river of history with each harvest, each ritual, each small act of care. And as villages and families lived their rhythms, a new voice emerged, a teacher who sought to turn daily respect into a philosophy of order, Confucius. The world into which Confucius was born was not one of peace and harmony, but of fragmentation. By the 6th century BCE, the Zhou dynasty had already begun to weaken. The old unity had fractured, leaving behind the spring and autumn period, an age marked by rival states competing for dominance, lords waging wars, and ordinary people caught in the uncertainty of shifting powers. It was in this setting, around 551 BCE, in the small state of Lu, that a boy named Kongqiu, later known as Kongzi or Confucius, was born. His family was of noble ancestry but modest means. His father died when Confucius was still a child, leaving the family poor. Yet from an early age, Confucius displayed a quiet seriousness, a love of learning, and a heart drawn to questions larger than himself. He grew up studying ancient rituals, songs, and texts, fragments of the earlier Zhou, when order and virtue had seemed strong. As he matured, he looked upon the disorder of his own time and asked, "How can society return to harmony? How can rulers govern with wisdom, and people live with respect?" Confucius did not seek answers in new inventions of thought, but in the revival of ancient wisdom. He believed the traditions of the Zhou, its rituals, its respect for hierarchy, its reverence for ancestors, contained the key to restoring balance. If people could live with virtue, guided by ritual and respect, harmony could return, even in troubled times. For years, Confucius served in minor government posts, but his true calling was as a teacher. He gathered disciples, walking from state to state, speaking with rulers, hoping to persuade them that governance was not about force, but about morality. Though rulers often dismissed him, his words sank deep into the hearts of his students. He taught not with fiery proclamations, but with gentle persistence. His lessons were conversations, filled with sayings that carried the clarity of water, the patience of soil. He became not just a thinker, but a model of virtue himself, modest, disciplined, respectful, always striving to embody what he taught. At the heart of Confucius's teaching was the idea that harmony begins not with laws or armies, but with virtue, the cultivation of moral character. He spoke often of Ren, usually translated as benevolence, humaneness, or simply goodness. Ren was the guiding light of all relationships, the compassion and empathy that made people treat one another with care. To live with Ren was to recognize humanity in others, to act not from selfishness, but from respect and kindness. But Ren was not abstract. It was expressed in the daily practice of Li, ritual propriety. Li meant more than ceremonies. It was the art of living with respect, to bow before elders, to speak gently, to honor ancestors, to conduct oneself with dignity. All these were Li. Through Li, people cultivated Ren, making compassion real in action. Confucius also taught the importance of the family as the foundation of virtue. Filial piety, honoring one's parents and elders, was not just a family duty, but the root of social order. If children respected parents, if siblings cared for one another, that harmony would extend outward to the community, and from community to state. For rulers, Confucius taught that power must rest on moral authority, not fear. A ruler should be like the North Star, steady and virtuous, guiding people not by force, but by example. If the ruler is righteous, he taught, the people will be righteous. In this vision, governance was an act of moral leadership, not domination. Education, too, was central. Confucius believed learning was not for elites alone, but for anyone willing to study. He taught history, poetry, music, and ethics, seeing knowledge as the cultivation of both mind and heart. To study was not merely to acquire facts, but to shape character, to refine oneself toward virtue. His teachings were preserved not in books he wrote, but in the memories of his disciples. After his death, they compiled his sayings into a collection known as the Analects, a text that would become one of the cornerstones of Chinese civilization. In its pages, Confucius's voice lives on, calm, wise, always urging balance, respect, and humanity. The Analects show us a teacher concerned less with grand theories than with the art of daily life. He did not promise utopia, but offered guidance on how to walk with dignity in a flawed world. His way was not dramatic, but steady, like water carving stone through patience. Confucius died in 479 BCE, believing perhaps that his mission had failed. He had never convinced rulers to fully embrace his teachings, and his dream of restoring harmony to the states seemed distant. Yet history tells a different story. His influence only grew after his death, spreading across centuries, shaping not only China, but much of East Asia. His disciples carried his words forward, teaching new generations. In time, Confucianism became the foundation of education and governance. During the Han Dynasty, officials were chosen not by birth, but by examinations rooted in Confucian texts. For 2,000 years, aspiring scholars memorized the Analects, reflecting on virtue, family, and respect. Confucius's vision of moral governance gave Chinese rulers a framework of legitimacy. The mandate of heaven demanded virtue, and Confucianism provided the path to it. A good ruler embodied Ren and Li, guiding the people by example. A corrupt ruler lost harmony, and with it, heaven's favor. His influence reached far beyond politics. In homes, filial piety and respect for elders became cultural cornerstones. In schools, education was seen not just as a privilege, but as a path to virtue. In society, rituals of respect, bows, ceremonies, words of courtesy, became woven into the fabric of daily life. Even outside China, Confucius thought traveled to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, shaping their traditions of family, education, and governance. His gentle wisdom transcended borders, resonating wherever people sought balance between order and compassion. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies in his vision of humanity. Confucius did not speak of unreachable ideals or divine mysteries. He spoke of people, their relationships, their choices, their capacity for goodness. He believed that anyone, through effort and learning, could cultivate virtue. His path was not reserved for sages or rulers, but open to all. Today, more than 2,500 years later, his words still echo. In a world often turbulent, his reminder remains timely, that harmony begins in the heart, radiates through the family, and extends to society. That power without virtue is fragile, but virtue, even without power, endures. Confucius showed that greatness lies not in conquering others, but in mastering oneself. His way was gentle but strong, a way of order that still whispers to us, across centuries, as the quiet path to peace. And while Confucius taught harmony through order, another voice emerged, Laozi, who looked not to rules, but to the flowing mystery of the Tao. In the same age that Confucius walked the states of China, urging order through ritual and virtue, another figure appeared whose voice moved in an entirely different rhythm. He was called Laozi, the Old Master, a sage whose words became the root of Taoism. Where Confucius looked to human society, Laozi looked to the mystery of nature itself. Legends about Laozi are many, wrapped in layers of myth. Some say he was born with white hair, already wise as an infant. Others describe him as an archivist of the Zhou court, quietly observing the decay of ritual and politics. Disillusioned, he chose to leave. At the western gate of the kingdom, the guard begged him to leave behind his wisdom. There, Laozi wrote a short book, the Tao De Jing, the book of the way and virtue, before disappearing into the unknown. Whether Laozi was one man or many, whether he lived at all in the way stories tell, matters less than the teachings themselves. The Tao De Jing is only about 5,000 characters, yet it has endured for over 2,000 years, offering guidance both profound and poetic. At its heart is the Tao, the way. The Tao is the underlying flow of the universe, the eternal principle that gives rise to all things, yet remains beyond words. The Tao cannot be fully described, for to name it is already to limit it. It is like water, yielding yet powerful, formless yet nourishing, flowing into low places that others avoid, yet wearing down mountains over time. To live well, Laozi taught, is not to resist the Tao, but to flow with it. This meant practicing Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, but better understood as effortless action, action in harmony with the natural flow. Just as a tree grows without forcing itself, just as rivers carve valleys without struggle, so too should humans live without straining against the world. Laozi's wisdom offered a counterpoint to the rigid hierarchies of his age. Where Confucius emphasized ritual and order, Laozi urged simplicity, humility, and return to nature. He warned that too many rules breed cunning, too much desire breeds chaos. True harmony, he suggested, lies not in control, but in letting go. Taoism is less a system of laws than a way of seeing. It invites us to look at nature and find there the deepest truths. The Tao Te Ching speaks in paradoxes, urging readers to see strength in softness, fullness in emptiness, action in stillness. The softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest, it says, reminding us that water, though yielding, shapes stone. The teaching is not abstract. It is an invitation to see how the world itself works. From this perspective comes the idea of Wu Wei, effortless alignment. Wu Wei does not mean doing nothing, but rather doing only what accords with the natural flow. A ruler practicing Wu Wei governs by simplicity, not by force. A person practicing Wu Wei lives with ease, not resistance. It is the art of harmony rather than domination. Taoism also teaches the value of simplicity. Laozi warned that the pursuit of wealth, power, or complexity distracts from the essence of life. To return to simplicity in food, clothing, dwelling, and thought is to return to the Tao. The ideal was not luxury, but contentment with enough. Nature became the greatest teacher. Mountains, rivers, trees, and clouds were not merely scenery, but expressions of the Tao. To wander among them was to study wisdom directly, without words. The hermit meditating in forests, the farmer observing seasons, the poet watching the moon, all were Taoist in spirit. Taoism also shaped ideas of health and longevity. Harmony with the Tao was not only spiritual, but physical. Early Taoist practices emphasized breathing, meditation, and movement to cultivate life energy, qi. Later, these practices evolved into systems like Tai Chi and Qigong, where slow movements mirrored the flow of rivers, strengthening body and calming mind. Unlike rigid codes, Taoism embraced mystery and paradox. It allowed contradictions, trusting that life itself contains opposites. This openness gave it resilience, making it not only a philosophy but a way of living, adaptable across centuries. While Confucianism found its home in schools and courts, Taoism flourished in mountains, temples, and the quiet corners of daily life. Together, they created a balance in Chinese culture. Confucius grounding society in duty, Laozi grounding it in flow. Over time, Taoism grew from the teachings of Laozi into a rich tradition, both philosophical and religious. Philosophical Taoism focused on the Tao Te Ching, the writings of Zhuangzi, and the cultivation of simplicity, Wu Wei, and harmony with nature. Religious Taoism developed later, with temples, rituals, and practices aimed at aligning communities with cosmic order. It drew on ancient folk beliefs, honoring deities, spirits, and immortals, weaving them into the vision of the Tao. Taoist temples arose in mountains, blending architecture with landscape. Their curved roofs echoed the sweep of hills, their courtyards framed trees and streams. Monks practiced meditation, chanting, and alchemy, seeking balance of body and spirit. Communities visited for blessings, guidance, or festivals that celebrated the cycles of nature. Taoism also shaped Chinese arts and literature. Painters depicted vast landscapes with tiny human figures, suggesting that people are but small parts of a greater flow. Poets like Li Bai, centuries later, would wander mountains, drinking wine, writing verses that captured both joy and mystery. Music, too, reflected Taoist influence, gentle, flowing, evoking rivers and wind. The legacy of Taoism lies in its humility. It asks us not to conquer, but to attune, not to force, but to yield. not to multiply desires, but to find joy in simplicity. Even today, its wisdom endures. Around the world, people practice Tai Chi, read the Tao Te Ching, and find in its verses a gentle reminder: life is not a battle to be won, but a current to be joined. The story of Laozi and Taoism shows that civilization needs both structure and freedom, both duty and flow. If Confucius gave China its bones, Laozi gave it its breath. Together, they allowed China to endure through storms, holding fast, yet moving gently, like bamboo in the wind. And as Confucius and Laozi shaped the moral and spiritual heart of China, countless other thinkers rose, 100 schools of thought, each offering their vision of harmony. The Zhou dynasty, though once strong, eventually fractured. By the 5th century BCE, the land had entered a turbulent era known as the Warring States period. Rival kingdoms rose and fell, alliances shifted like the wind, and war became a constant shadow. Villages burned, families scattered, and rulers sought advantage in cunning as much as in arms. Yet out of this turbulence came something extraordinary, a blossoming of ideas. When the world is uncertain, people search for meaning, and in this searching, voices multiplied. Scholars, wanderers, teachers, and sages moved from court to court, offering rulers their philosophies. Some promised strength through law, others harmony through compassion, others balance through alignment with nature. This flowering came to be called the 100 schools of thought, though in truth it was not 100, but countless voices, weaving a rich tapestry of Chinese philosophy. Each school asked the same question: how should humans live? How should rulers govern? How can harmony be restored? Their answers differed, but together they formed one of the most fertile intellectual ages in history. Confucius had already offered his vision of virtue, respect, and ritual. Laozi spoke of the Tao, the mysterious way, but alongside them, other thinkers emerged, bold, practical, idealistic, and inventive. Their words spread not only through courts, but through villages and schools, shaping the imaginations of generations. This age reminds us that philosophy is not a luxury of peace. Often, it is born from struggle. In times of uncertainty, people seek new paths, new visions of order. The 100 schools arose because the old order no longer sufficed. Where confusion reigned, clarity was demanded. Where violence spread, wisdom was sought. And so the chaos of the warring states became also a golden age of thought, a paradox that shows us how human creativity often blooms even in hardship. Among the 100 schools, some rose to prominence, their teachings shaping China for centuries. The Mohists, founded by Mozi, emphasized universal love. In a world torn by war, Mozi taught that people should care for all others as they care for themselves, without favoritism. He rejected costly rituals, arguing that what mattered was practical benefit, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, reducing suffering. Mohism was both compassionate and utilitarian, calling for simplicity, equality, and care. Opposite in spirit were the legalists. They looked at human nature and saw not goodness, but selfishness. To them, order could not rest on virtue alone, but on strict laws and enforcement. Han Feizi, one of their most famous voices, argued that rulers must govern with clear rewards and punishments, ensuring obedience through discipline. Legalism promised strength and unity, though often at the cost of harshness. Another important current was the school of yin-yang and the 5 elements, which sought to explain the universe through cycles of opposites and transformations. Yin and yang, the dark and the light, the soft and the hard, were seen as the rhythm of all things. Alongside them, the 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, describe the patterns of change in nature, society, and even the body. This school gave rise to cosmology, medicine, and astrology, embedding itself deeply in Chinese thought. The agriculturalists argued for a return to simplicity, valuing farming above all. They believed rulers should work the fields alongside their people, creating equality and shared labor. Though their vision never became dominant, it reflected a yearning for groundedness in the soil. Other schools focused on rhetoric, debate, and logic, the so-called logicians or sophists. They delighted in paradoxes, showing the complexity of language and reasoning. Though less influential in governance, they revealed the richness of intellectual play in this age. Each voice offered a different medicine for the sickness of the time. Confucians offered virtue, Taoists offered flow, Mohists offered universal love, legalists offered order, cosmologists offered patterns, agriculturalists offered simplicity. Together, they created a vibrant chorus, each note distinct, yet all searching for harmony. The 100 schools of thought did not remain equal in influence. Over time, Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism rose to the forefront, each shaping China in different ways. Legalism, though harsh, provided the structure for the unification of China under the Qin dynasty. Its emphasis on law, discipline, and centralization gave rulers the tools to end centuries of war. Yet legalism alone could not sustain hearts. Once order was achieved, its rigidity often provoked resistance. Taoism endured as a spiritual and cultural current, offering balance to the severity of laws and rituals. Its reverence for nature and simplicity spoke to poets, mystics, and seekers across the centuries. Even as states rose and fell, Taoism whispered of eternal flow, a reminder that beyond politics lay the greater way. Confucianism, however, became the backbone of Chinese society. Its emphasis on family, virtue, and ritual gave rulers a moral foundation, schools a curriculum, and families a structure. For 2 millennia, education and governance rested on Confucian classics, weaving his vision into the very fabric of Chinese life. Yet even those schools that faded left their imprint. Mohism, though never dominant, influenced debates on justice and care. The yin-yang school shaped medicine, cosmology, and philosophy. Agricultural ideals persisted in dreams of simple living. The logicians hinted at the play of language and paradox that resurfaced in later thought. The true legacy of the 100 schools lies in their diversity. They remind us that wisdom does not come from one voice alone, but from dialogue, contrast, and even conflict. Their coexistence, though often contentious, enriched China's cultural soil, ensuring that no single vision dominated unchecked. Even today, their questions remain alive. How should we govern? Through virtue, law, or love? How should we live? In simplicity, in flow, in ritual? How should we understand the world? Through logic, through cycles, through mystery? These are not ancient questions only. They are human questions, as relevant now as they were 2,500 years ago. And so the 100 schools of thought are not relics, but companions, voices across time, still whispering in our ears, reminding us that wisdom is never finished, that every age must search anew for harmony. And as philosophies flourished, so too did poetry and sacred texts, the songs and writings that carried the heart of a civilization. Civilizations are not only built of stone and bronze, they are built of words. In ancient China, words carried weight beyond communication. They were bridges to ancestors, records of memory, vessels of beauty, and whispers of truth. Among the earliest treasures of this world were the sacred texts and poems that shaped the Chinese soul. The roots of this tradition lay in ritual. Oracle bones of the Shang carried the first carved characters, questions to ancestors, records of prayers, verdicts of fate. By the Zhou dynasty, writing had expanded into bronze inscriptions, recording victories, rituals, and ancestral dedications. These were not merely practical, they were sacred acts. To inscribe was to preserve, to honor, to give permanence to fleeting moments. As centuries passed, collections of wisdom emerged, among them the five classics revered as foundations of Chinese culture. The Book of Changes, I Ching, a manual of divination; the Book of Documents, records of speeches and history; the Book of Rites, guiding rituals and propriety; the Spring and Autumn Annals, a chronicle of events; and the Book of Songs, a collection of poetry both sacred and simple. The Book of Songs, or Shijing, holds a special place. It gathers folk songs sung in fields, odes performed in courts, and hymns offered in rituals. Here we find the voices of both kings and commoners woven together. A farmer sings of toil, a maiden of longing, a ruler of virtue, a priest of sacrifice. These poems reveal that beneath dynasties and philosophies, China's heart beat in rhythm with words. The Book of Songs shows that poetry was never luxury, but necessity. Songs taught values, preserved memory, and expressed feelings that could not be spoken otherwise. They carried wisdom from one generation to the next, just as rivers carry water to new fields. Poetry became the pulse of culture, reminding all who listened that words themselves could be sacred. Farmers sang while sowing fields, their rhythms echoing the motion of plows. Mothers lulled children with lullabies, carrying both comfort and wisdom. Young men and women exchanged verses in courtship, their words playful or tender, carrying emotion across distance. Poetry was not separate from life. It was life, expressed in song. Even rulers valued poetry as a measure of virtue. The Zhou kings collected folk songs from their states, believing these verses revealed the moral health of the people. A joyous song suggested harmony, while a bitter one hinted at misrule. Thus, poetry became not only expression but governance, a mirror of society's heart. Music accompanied much of this poetry. Harps, flutes, and drums gave rhythm to words, turning verses into living breath. Rituals at temples resounded with hymns. Festivals rang with folk songs. Quiet evenings echoed with the soft strum of strings. Through music and poetry, individuals and communities alike connected to one another, to ancestors, and to heaven. The importance of poetry was reflected in education. From early times, children learned not only farming and rituals, but also songs and verses. Memory was sharpened, values instilled, and language refined through the repetition of poems. To recite was to carry wisdom within oneself, to keep the voices of the past alive. This tradition only deepened over time. Later dynasties, especially the Tang, would elevate poetry to one of the highest arts. But its roots lay here, in the early songs of fields and courts, where every verse was a reflection of daily life and cosmic order. Poetry in China was never escapist. It was grounded, earthy, alive with images of rivers, fields, moons, and hearths. In it, the divine and the ordinary mingled, showing that beauty resides not in distant heavens, but in the flowing rhythm of human life. Beyond poetry, sacred texts shaped the philosophical and spiritual foundations of China. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, offered a vision of the universe as dynamic, shifting, always in transformation. Its system of hexagrams, lines broken and unbroken, symbolized the dance of yin and yang, the interplay of opposites that form reality. To consult the I Ching was to seek guidance not from fixed laws, but from patterns of change, a profound reminder that life is flow. The Book of Rites preserved rituals, from court ceremonies to family offerings. It reminded people that every gesture, a bow, a word, an offering, could carry sacred weight. Ritual was not formality, but alignment with cosmic order. The Book of Documents gathered speeches, declarations, and edicts, emphasizing the moral duty of rulers. It echoed the idea that governance was not domination, but stewardship under heaven's watch. Together, these texts formed the roots of Confucian learning, guiding rulers, scholars, and families alike. They became more than books. They were touchstones of culture, studied for centuries, memorized by students, and revered as guides to life. Later Taoist texts like the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi's writings expanded this sacred library, adding voices of paradox and play, of mystery and flow. Together, Confucian and Taoist writings created a balance, one emphasizing duty and order, the other spontaneity and harmony. The reverence for texts in China reflects a larger truth, that words were seen not just as tools, but as living forces. To write was to shape reality, to carry memory, to call forth spirit. Calligraphy itself became an art of meditation, each brushstroke a reflection of the writer's mind and heart. In poetry, sacred texts, and calligraphy, China found ways to unite beauty, wisdom, and spirituality. Words were not separate from the world, but woven into its very fabric. And so the legacy of sacred texts and poetry is more than literature. It is the soul of a civilization speaking across centuries, reminding us that truth is often carried not in monuments, but in verses, prayers, and lines of ink on paper. And as texts recorded wisdom and poetry sang the heart, other seekers looked beyond life itself to the mysteries of immortality and alchemy. From the earliest days, humans have looked at the stars, the mountains, and the flowing rivers and asked, why must life end? Could there be a way to last forever? In ancient China, this question became not just a dream, but a discipline, the pursuit of immortality. The cycles of life and death were deeply respected in early China. Ancestor worship reflected the belief that the dead continued to influence the living. Rituals honored this continuity, but alongside reverence was longing. If ancestors could live in spirit, might it be possible to extend life in the body? Could one walk the earth forever, free of decay? This longing gave birth to alchemy, the blending of science, spirituality, and myth. Alchemy was not merely chemistry, though it dealt with minerals, herbs, and transformations of matter. It was a quest for harmony with the cosmos, for alignment with the Tao, for a way to preserve life by capturing the rhythms of heaven and earth. Stories abounded of immortals who had achieved this dream. Wandering sages on mountaintops, hermits drinking dew and breathing with the rhythm of the stars, men and women who transcended the ordinary and stepped into eternity. These immortals were not simply alive forever. They were free, serene, luminous, embodiments of harmony. The pursuit of immortality reflected a truth about the human spirit. We are not satisfied with survival alone. We yearn for permanence, for transcendence, for a way to outlast the fragile vessel of the body. In China, this yearning took on unique forms, blending practical experimentation with spiritual discipline. The practice of alchemy in early China moved along two paths: external alchemy and internal alchemy. External alchemy sought immortality through substances. Alchemists worked with metals, minerals, and herbs, believing that certain combinations could produce the elixir of life. Gold, admired for its incorruptibility, was thought to hold power against decay. Cinnabar, with its vibrant red hue, was prized as a substance of transformation. Elixirs were brewed in crucibles, mixed with complex formulas, offered as potions of longevity. Yet these experiments were often dangerous. Some elixirs contained mercury or arsenic, leading not to immortality, but to illness or death. Still, the search continued for centuries, driven by emperors and seekers alike. The dream of immortality was so powerful that failure did not extinguish it. Alongside these physical pursuits, internal alchemy developed, offering a more spiritual path. Instead of seeking immortality in potions, practitioners turned inward, to the body, breath, and spirit. They believed the human being was a microcosm of the universe, containing energies that, if cultivated, could lead to transcendence. Breathing exercises mirrored the rhythms of wind and wave. Meditation aligned the body with the Tao. Movements, slow, flowing, balanced, circulated life energy, qi, preserving vitality. Sexual practices sought to balance yin and yang, conserving life force. These methods aimed not at conquering death through substances, but at harmonizing so deeply with nature that death itself became irrelevant. Mountains became sacred sites for these practices. Secluded peaks, shrouded in mist, offered purity and closeness to heaven. Hermits withdrew from society, meditating among rocks and streams, seeking transformation in solitude. Legends told of these sages ascending into the clouds, leaving no body behind. The contrast between external and internal alchemy reflects the broader tension in human life, the search for answers outside versus the search within. Some sought eternal life in gold and potions, others in breath and spirit. Both paths revealed the same longing, to escape the limits of time. The dream of immortality, though never fulfilled literally, left a deep legacy in Chinese culture. First, it shaped the imagination. Stories of immortals filled poetry, art, and folklore. The 8 immortals, famous figures of Taoist legend, each embodied a different path to transcendence. Through wisdom, music, healing, or even eccentricity, they wandered the world, symbols of hope, resilience, and freedom. Second, it influenced medicine and science. Though external alchemy often failed in its original goal, the careful study of minerals, herbs, and processes contributed to the growth of Chinese medicine and chemistry. The focus on balance, transformation, and the interplay of substances laid foundations that endured. Internal alchemy, meanwhile, enriched practices of health and longevity. Breathing exercises, meditation, and movement arts evolved into systems like Qigong and Tai Chi, still practiced today worldwide. These disciplines, though no longer tied to the promise of immortality, preserve the wisdom of harmony, vitality, and mindful living. Third, the pursuit of immortality reflects the Chinese vision of harmony with the cosmos. Unlike some traditions that imagined eternal life as escape from the world, Taoist immortality was union with it. To live forever was not to abandon nature, but to align so deeply that one's being flowed with heaven and earth. Even emperors were captivated. The first emperor of Qin sent expeditions to find the elixir of life, while Han rulers supported alchemists at court. Though these quests often ended in disappointment, they show how powerful the dream remained, a dream strong enough to command armies and shape history. Ultimately, the immortality sought in potions was never found, yet in another sense, it was achieved. The practices, stories, and arts born from this quest still live, carried forward across centuries. The dream itself proved immortal. The pursuit of immortality also reveals a paradox. It shows both our fear of death and our deep respect for life. To seek eternity is to affirm that life is precious, worth preserving, worth extending. It is a reminder that in every age, humans have wrestled with the same questions: how to live, how to endure, how to find meaning in the face of mortality. The story of Chinese alchemy is not only about failure to escape death. It is about the creativity, hope, and wisdom that arise when humans dare to dream beyond their limits. And while seekers of immortality turned inward to body and breath, others turned outward to art, music, and ritual, weaving beauty into the fabric of daily life. For centuries, China had been divided among warring states. Rival kingdoms rose and fell, armies clashed across valleys, alliances shifted like tides. The Zhou dynasty, once strong, had long since lost its power, leaving behind only fragments of authority. Into this turbulent world stepped a state from the west, Qin. The land of Qin was rugged, its people disciplined and hardened by geography. Surrounded by mountains and rivers, they developed a reputation for resilience and military strength. While other states sought refinement in rituals and courtly elegance, Qin cultivated efficiency, discipline, and law. Central to Qin's rise was the influence of legalism. Unlike Confucianism, which taught virtue, or Taoism, which urged flow, legalism insisted on strict laws and clear punishments. To legalist thinkers, humans were selfish by nature, and only strong rules could bring order. Qin rulers embraced this philosophy wholeheartedly, transforming their state into a disciplined machine of governance and war. At the heart of Qin's ascent was Zheng, a young king who inherited the throne at just 13 years old. From the beginning, he showed an iron will, uniting ministers and generals under his command. He reorganized armies, enforced laws, and launched campaigns against rival states. One by one, the other kingdoms fell. Han, Zhou, Yan, Wei, Chu, and Qi all conquered, their lands absorbed into Qin. In 221 BCE, Zheng declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. For the first time in history, the many states of China were unified under a single rule. It was a moment of immense transformation. Centuries of division ended, replaced by the vision of one empire, one system, one ruler. The age of warring lords gave way to the birth of imperial China. The first emperor was not content with conquest alone. He sought to shape a lasting empire, one that would endure beyond his lifetime. To achieve this, he launched sweeping reforms that transformed every corner of Chinese life. First came the standardization of systems. Under the Zhou, different states had used different weights, measures, and currencies. Qin Shi Huang unified them all. The same coins, the same measurements, the same written script. This allowed trade, governance, and communication to flow smoothly across the vast empire. He reorganized the land into administrative districts, appointing officials loyal not to local lords, but to the central government. This destroyed the feudal divisions of the past, ensuring power flowed only upward toward the emperor. The emperor also invested in massive infrastructure. Roads and canals were built across China, linking distant provinces to the capital. Armies could march quickly, merchants could trade more easily, messages could travel farther. The empire's arteries of stone and water bound its vast body together. Perhaps most famous was the construction of walls. Though the Great Wall as we know it today was built centuries later, Qin Shi Huang ordered the connection of regional fortifications into a massive defense system along the northern frontier. Soldiers, peasants, and prisoners labored to raise walls across mountains and deserts, guarding against nomadic incursions. This immense project, though harsh, symbolized the emperor's determination to protect and define his empire. Yet these achievements came at a cost. The emperor's methods were severe. Heavy taxes funded his projects, forced labor filled his armies and construction sites. Strict laws punished disobedience harshly. While the empire grew stronger, its people often bore the weight in silence and suffering. Still, the vision was undeniable. The Qin dynasty, though brief, laid the foundations for imperial China. Centralized rule, standardized systems, great works of engineering, and the dream of unity. Perhaps no story captures the first emperor's ambition better than his own tomb. In the city of Xi'an, beneath fields that once seemed ordinary, lies one of the greatest archaeological wonders of the world, the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. Buried within is the famous terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, each unique in face and detail, standing guard over their emperor. Warriors, chariots, horses, an entire army crafted from earth, frozen in silent vigilance. The tomb itself, according to ancient accounts, was vast and wondrous. Rivers of mercury were said to flow within, a miniature cosmos built to accompany the emperor into eternity. Though much remains unexcavated, The scale of the project speaks of both ambition and obsession, the desire not only to rule in life, but to command in death. This obsession was tied to the emperor's fear of mortality. Despite his power, he could not escape the universal truth. Legends tell of his desperate search for the elixir of life, sending ships to distant seas, seeking sages and alchemists who promised immortality. Yet the very potions he consumed, laced with mercury, may have hastened his death. In 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang passed away during a journey, leaving behind an empire both immense and fragile. The Qin dynasty itself lasted only 15 years beyond his death. Harsh laws and heavy burdens sparked rebellion. Without his iron hand, the empire unraveled, giving way to the Han dynasty. Yet despite its brevity, the Qin left an enduring legacy. The very idea of China as one unified empire began here. Standardized writing, currency, and administration became the backbone of governance for millennia. The Great Wall's beginnings marked the empire's awareness of its vast borders, and the terracotta army still stands as a testament to ambition that defied even death. Qin Shi Huang remains a paradoxical figure. To some, he was a tyrant, ruthless, severe, unforgiving. To others, he was a visionary, the architect of unity, the first to dream of China as one. Perhaps he was both, for history often weaves greatness and cruelty together. His story reminds us of the fragility of power. Even emperors, with armies of clay and rivers of mercury, cannot escape mortality. Yet it also reminds us of the endurance of vision. The empire he forged in 15 years set the stage for 2,000 more. And so, in the tombs of Xi'an, in the stones of walls, in the script still used today, the first emperor lives on, not immortal in body, but immortal in legacy. And after Qin's fall, the Han dynasty rose, carrying forward unity, but with gentler hands and a culture that would blossom for centuries. When the Qin dynasty collapsed after only 15 years, many feared that China's unity would vanish with it. The empire seemed fragile, its people exhausted by harsh laws and endless labor. But out of this turmoil rose a new dynasty, one that would not only preserve unity, but nurture it into flourishing strength. This was the Han dynasty, founded in 206 BCE by a man named Liu Bang, later known as Emperor Gaozu of Han. Unlike the noble rulers of old, Liu Bang was of humble origin. Once a peasant, later a soldier, he rose through grit, charisma, and the loyalty he inspired. His victory over rival warlords marked more than a political triumph. It signaled the dawn of a dynasty that would last 4 centuries and shape China's identity for millennia. From the beginning, the Han sought a gentler hand than the Qin. They kept the strong, centralized structures that Qin Shi Huang had built, unified laws, standardized writing, efficient administration, but tempered them with Confucian ideals. Harsh punishments softened, rituals and learning returned to prominence, and governance was tied not only to law, but to virtue. This blend of legalist structure and Confucian philosophy gave the Han a unique balance. Firm enough to maintain order, humane enough to win loyalty. It was a formula that allowed them to endure. The Han also opened space for cultural blossoming. Where the Qin had burned books, the Han encouraged scholarship. Where the Qin had ruled through fear, the Han sought legitimacy through moral example. This difference in tone allowed creativity, philosophy, and science to flourish, making the Han era one of China's golden ages. Under rulers like Emperor Wu, the dynasty expanded its borders, strengthened its institutions, and encouraged exploration. The Silk Road began to emerge, carrying goods and ideas across Asia. Arts, music, and literature thrived, and for the first time, the name Han became synonymous with the identity of the Chinese people, a name still carried proudly today. The Han dynasty was not only a time of political strength, but also of rich cultural life. Its people, from emperors to farmers, lived within rhythms shaped by both tradition and new innovations. For the ordinary person, life remained centered on farming. Wheat and millet filled northern fields, while rice thrived in the south. Iron tools, more advanced than in earlier times, made work more efficient. Villages pulsed with the cycle of sowing and harvest, their festivals and rituals tied to the land's bounty. Families remained the cornerstone of society. Confucian ideals placed great emphasis on filial piety, respect for parents and elders. Households often included several generations under one roof, with grandparents teaching wisdom, parents guiding daily life, and children learning their place in the family order. Education flourished in this era. Schools grew, and talented students could rise through the ranks not by birth, but by merit. The imperial examination system, though still in early form, began to select officials based on knowledge of Confucian texts. For the first time, learning offered a pathway from humble beginnings to positions of influence. Art and literature thrived. Poetry captured emotions of love, loss, and nature's beauty. Historians like Sima Qian compiled detailed chronicles, shaping how China remembered its past. Music filled courts and festivals played on zithers, flutes, and drums, echoing with both elegance and joy. The Han also saw advances in science and technology. Astronomers charted stars and planets. Inventions like paper began to transform communication. Doctors refined acupuncture and herbal medicine, exploring the balance of qi in the body. Craftsmen created silk of exquisite fineness, bronze mirrors, and pottery that blended function with beauty. Spiritual life expanded as well. Confucianism shaped ethics, but Taoism and folk beliefs flourished alongside it. Temples honored deities of rivers, mountains, and heavens. Ancestors remained central, their presence guiding families. This blending of philosophies and beliefs gave Han society a richness of perspective. The empire itself grew outward. The Silk Road opened paths of trade, carrying silk, spices, and jade to distant lands, while bringing back glass, horses, and ideas from India, Persia, and beyond. Through these exchanges, China became not only a center of its own world, but a participant in a wider one. In the daily lives of its people, the Han dynasty was a time of vitality, a civilization confident in its roots, yet open to the wider horizon. Though the Han dynasty faced rebellions, court intrigues, and the challenges of ruling a vast land, its legacy became one of China's most enduring. One of its greatest contributions was the establishment of Confucianism as state philosophy. By tying governance to moral values, the Han created a cultural foundation that lasted for centuries. Schools, families, and officials all absorbed Confucian teachings, embedding them into the DNA of society. The Han also expanded China's identity. The very word Han became synonymous with the Chinese people. To this day, the majority ethnic group in China calls itself the Han, a reflection of how deeply this dynasty shaped self-understanding. Culturally, the Han gave the world enduring treasures. Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian offered one of the first comprehensive histories of any civilization. Han art, with its tomb murals, lacquerware, and jade carvings, revealed both elegance and spiritual depth. Poetry and music from this era echoed through later generations. The Silk Road, born in Han times, opened China to the world. It was not only goods that traveled, but stories, religions, and technologies. Buddhism entered China along these routes, beginning a transformation of spiritual life that would echo for centuries. Even in decline, the Han left lessons. Corruption, factional struggles, and peasant uprisings eventually weakened the dynasty. In 220 CE, it fell, plunging China into division once more. Yet its memory endured as a golden age, a benchmark against which later dynasties measured themselves. The Han's legacy lies in its balance. It preserved unity but allowed diversity. It upheld tradition but welcomed innovation. It ruled with structure but softened it with morality. In this balance, it created a civilization that felt not only powerful but humane. And so when we look back, we see the Han Dynasty not only as rulers, but as cultivators of a way of life. They built roads, encouraged learning, wove poetry, advanced medicine, and expanded horizons. They showed that the true blossoming of a civilization comes not only through power, but through the flowering of culture, values, and spirit. And as the Han passed, their unity fractured, but the Silk Road remained, carrying stories, goods, and dreams between East and West. When we think of empires, we often picture walls, palaces, and armies. But sometimes the most enduring legacies are not boundaries of stone, but roads. During the Han Dynasty, one such road began to take shape, not a single highway, but a web of routes stretching thousands of miles, linking China to the wider world. This was the Silk Road. It was not built in a day, nor even in a generation. For centuries, small trade networks had connected villages, towns, and neighboring kingdoms. Farmers sold grain to nearby markets, nomads exchanged horses for cloth, merchants carried salt, spices, and tools from one valley to the next. But under the Han, as China grew stronger and looked westward, these threads were woven together into a vast tapestry of exchange. The Silk Road was less a road and more a network of pathways. Caravans wound through deserts and mountains, across the Gobi and Taklamakan, along the edges of the Himalayas, and into the fertile lands of Central Asia. Routes split and rejoined, some leading north, others south, all converging into a great artery of commerce. At its heart was silk. Chinese silk, woven with extraordinary delicacy, became a treasure coveted in distant lands. Light, strong, shimmering with beauty, it seemed almost otherworldly. Traders carried bolts of silk westward, where it was exchanged for horses, glass, wool, gold, and strange spices. But though silk gave the road its name, it was not the only treasure. Jade, paper, porcelain, and lacquerware traveled alongside cinnamon, saffron, frankincense, and gems. More than goods, the road carried ideas, stories, religions, music, art. From east to west, from west to east, cultures touched and transformed one another. The Silk Road was not a single empire's creation. It was born from human desire to connect, to exchange, to explore. Across deserts, over mountains, through hardships, people carried not only wares, but dreams. The Silk Road was alive not only with goods, but with people, merchants, monks, soldiers, travelers, and storytellers. Merchants formed the backbone. They traveled in caravans, camels laden with cargo, guides leading the way through sandstorms and rocky passes. Life on the road was harsh, blistering heat by day, freezing cold by night, dangers of bandits, thirst, and exhaustion. Yet merchants persevered, driven by the promise of wealth and the thrill of distant horizons. Caravanserais, roadside inns, dotted the routes, offering rest, food, and safety. These inns became meeting places of cultures. A merchant from China might sit beside a trader from Persia, a traveler from India, or a nomad from the steppes, sharing meals and stories by the fire. Languages mingled, ideas flowed, friendships were forged. Monks also traveled these paths. With them came religions. Most influential was Buddhism, carried from India into China by devoted monks who walked or rode across deserts to share teachings of compassion and enlightenment. Along the way, they stopped in oasis towns, building monasteries, translating scriptures, and planting seeds of faith that would grow deep in Chinese soil. But Buddhism was not alone. Zoroastrianism from Persia, Christianity from the Near East, and later Islam all found their way along these roads. In turn, Chinese beliefs and philosophies influenced lands far beyond their borders. The Silk Road became not only a trade route, but a highway of the spirit. Art and music flowed as well. Instruments like the lute and flute crossed borders, blending sounds into new melodies. Painters shared techniques, sculptors new forms, weavers new patterns. Cultures met not in conflict alone, but in creativity. In this way, the Silk Road was more than commerce. It was conversation. Every marketplace became a classroom, every caravan a library, every journey a bridge between worlds. The Silk Road endured for centuries, rising and falling with dynasties and empires. At times it flourished, at others it faltered under wars, plagues, or shifting powers. Yet its impact reached far beyond trade. First, it reshaped economies. Goods that once seemed local became global. A Chinese silk robe might be worn by a Roman noble. A Persian glass vessel might sit on a Chinese table. This blending enriched lives and expanded imaginations, making people aware of a world far larger than their own valleys and kingdoms. Second, it transformed cultures. Buddhism took root in China, influencing art, philosophy, and daily practice. Later, Islamic science and medicine flowed eastward, enriching knowledge. Chinese inventions like paper traveled west, eventually transforming Europe. Each exchange left ripples that spread far beyond their origin. Third, it revealed the power of connection. The Silk Road showed that civilizations are not isolated, but interwoven. Even empires that fought fiercely were connected by trade, ideas, and shared needs. The desert caravan, humble and slow, carried a lesson greater than armies, that human progress often moves through exchange, not conquest. Even today, the Silk Road lives on in imagination. Modern highways and railroads follow similar paths, but the ancient road remains a symbol of adventure, of discovery, of the meeting of worlds. In its sands and stones lie echoes of voices from countless lands, mingled into one great human story. The Silk Road also carries a reminder that what endures is not only power, but connection. Empires rose and fell, but the roads remained, because people always sought to meet, to trade, to share. Thus, the Silk Road is not just history, it is metaphor, a vision of humanity as a web of journeys, each road leading to another, each traveler carrying part of a greater whole. And while the Silk Road carried goods and stories, within China itself, art and invention blossomed, weaving beauty into the fabric of empire. The Han Dynasty was not only an age of governance and empire, it was an age of beauty. Across its 4 centuries, artisans, painters, and craftsmen poured their creativity into works that reflected both elegance and meaning. To enter Han China is to step into a world alive with art. In tombs carved into hillsides, murals bloomed across stone walls. Painted figures of dancers, hunters, and celestial beings seemed to move even in silence. These murals were not decoration alone. They were visions of eternity, designed to guide the departed into the afterlife with images of joy and abundance. Craftsmen shaped objects of breathtaking detail. Lacquerware, made by coating wood with layers of polished resin, shone with deep reds and blacks, often painted with gold patterns of animals, flowers, or mythic scenes. These pieces were used in daily life, yet their beauty elevated the simplest meal into ritual. Jade, long revered as the stone of purity, was carved into ornaments, pendants, and burial suits. To the Han, jade symbolized virtue, clarity, and immortality. Some rulers were even buried in full suits of jade plaques sewn with gold thread, believing the stone could preserve their bodies for eternity. Bronze continued to play a central role. Han bronze mirrors, cast with intricate designs of dragons, phoenixes, and cosmic patterns, reflected not only the face but the order of the heavens. To look into such a mirror was to see oneself within the cosmos. Even small items revealed artistry. Hairpins of carved bone, pottery lamps shaped like animals, silks embroidered with delicate patterns. Each object carried beauty into daily life. The Han world was not divided into high art and ordinary craft. Beauty flowed through all things, making the daily and the divine inseparable. Alongside art, the Han dynasty was an era of astonishing invention. The curiosity and creativity of its people gave rise to innovations that shaped not only their world, but ours. Perhaps most famous was the invention of paper. Before this, bamboo strips, silk, or wooden tablets carried writing. These were heavy, expensive, or fragile. But around the 2nd century BCE, craftsmen discovered that plant fibers, hemp, bark, rags, could be pulped, pressed, and dried into thin sheets. Paper was light, durable, and inexpensive. It transformed communication, education, and record-keeping, allowing knowledge to spread more widely than ever before. The Han also advanced astronomy. Observatories tracked the movements of stars and planets with precision. They created star maps, recorded eclipses, and sought patterns that linked heaven and earth. These observations were not only scientific but spiritual, reflecting the belief that cosmic order and human order were intertwined. In medicine, Han doctors refined practices that still endure today. They studied herbs, roots, and minerals, blending them into remedies for ailments. Acupuncture, the art of inserting fine needles to balance qi, grew in sophistication. Medical texts preserved their knowledge, combining empirical observation with the philosophy of yin and yang. Technology advanced as well. Iron tools improved farming, helping feed the growing population. The seismograph, invented by Shang, detected distant earthquakes through ingenious mechanisms of levers and balls. Water-powered mills ground grain, harnessing nature's energy for human use. Even simple inventions reflected brilliance. The wheelbarrow, first appearing in Han times, transformed labor, allowing one person to move heavy loads with ease. Kites, originally used for military signaling, also carried joy as toys soaring against the sky. The spirit of invention was not limited to utility. Curiosity, observation, and play all mingled. The Han people saw the world as full of possibilities, waiting to be discovered, refined, and shared. Beyond palaces and inventions, the Han dynasty was alive with the wonders of daily life, the quiet rhythms that gave meaning to existence. In towns, bustling markets brought together farmers, artisans, and merchants. Stalls overflowed with grain, silk, pottery, spices, and trinkets. The hum of bargaining filled the air, mingling with the laughter of children, the scent of roasted meats, the sound of flutes from street performers. Markets were not just places of trade, but centers of community. Homes varied from the grand courtyards of nobles to the modest dwellings of farmers. Yet in each, life revolved around family and hearth. Meals were simple yet nourishing: rice or millet, vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish. Chopsticks, now widely used, made dining both practical and graceful. Tea had not yet become central, but warm broths and wines comforted households. Clothing reflected both class and artistry. Nobles wore flowing silks dyed in bright colors, embroidered with dragons or clouds. Farmers wore hemp or cotton, durable and plain, yet often crafted with care. Shoes of straw, hats of bamboo, belts of jade or leather. Each item reflected the blending of function and beauty. Festivals punctuated the year with joy. Lanterns glowed against night skies. Drums and gongs echoed in streets. Dances honored deities and ancestors. These festivals were moments when the ordinary transformed into the extraordinary, binding communities in light and laughter. Education, too, became part of daily life. Schools spread Confucian learning, teaching children to recite classics, write characters, and cultivate respect. For some, education offered a path to official service, lifting families into new opportunities. For others, it was simply a way to live with dignity and wisdom. Even leisure had its place. Board games like Liubo entertained nobles. Music filled gatherings, with zithers, flutes, and drums, creating harmonies that soothed or inspired. Storytellers recited epics of past kings and heroes, keeping history alive in memory and voice. In every corner, the Han world was alive with detail, objects, practices, and rhythms that turned life into a tapestry of meaning. It was not only emperors and generals who shaped the dynasty, but farmers, artisans, mothers, children, and teachers, whose quiet wonders filled each day. The legacy of Han daily life reminds us that civilization is not only measured in monuments, but in the humble, enduring acts of ordinary people, acts that carry beauty, wisdom, and resilience across centuries. And yet, even in times of peace and creativity, shadows remained, uprisings, challenges, and the slow decline that would test the endurance of empire. The Han dynasty endured for 4 centuries, long enough to become woven into the fabric of Chinese identity. Its balance of order and culture made it a golden age, remembered with reverence. Yet even golden ages cast shadows. Beneath the splendor of palaces and the hum of markets, strains slowly grew. Political struggles, social unrest, and fractures that widened over time. The seeds of decline were sown in the court itself. Emperors wielded immense authority, but not all were strong or wise. Some became entangled in luxury, others fell under the influence of powerful eunuchs or ambitious relatives. The balance of governance, so carefully crafted, began to tilt toward intrigue and corruption. As the dynasty matured, wealth flowed into the hands of a few. Great families accumulated land, while peasants struggled under the weight of taxes, rents, and labor demands. Farmers, the backbone of Han prosperity, found themselves caught in cycles of debt. Their hardship grew quietly but steadily, like cracks spreading through stone. At the same time, natural disasters strained the empire. Floods, droughts, and locust plagues struck at intervals, destroying crops and leaving hunger in their wake. To many, these calamities seemed signs that heaven's mandate, the divine approval believed to legitimize rulers, was faltering. In China's worldview, when rulers lost virtue, heaven sent warnings through disaster. The empire's vastness also became a challenge. With borders stretching far west and north, armies were constantly needed to defend against nomadic incursions. Campaigns drained resources and exhausted soldiers. The further the empire expanded, the more difficult it became to sustain its strength. And so, while the Han still shone outwardly, inwardly pressures mounted. The Golden Age bore within it the quiet shadows of its decline. The discontent of peasants eventually found its voice in one of the most dramatic rebellions of Chinese history, the Yellow Turban Rebellion. In the late 2nd century CE, hardship spread across the countryside. Landless peasants toiled endlessly, while wealthy landlords grew richer. Natural disasters worsened suffering. Amid this despair, new spiritual movements gained followers, promising relief and renewal. One such movement was led by Zhang, a healer and mystic who preached the way of great peace. He and his brothers claimed to channel divine power, offering healing and prophecy. They wore yellow headscarves, symbols of their movement, and soon gathered a vast following among the poor. In 184 CE, their uprising erupted. Villages and towns across northern China rose in rebellion, demanding justice, equality, and a new order. The Yellow Turban rebels were not merely an army. They were a movement of faith, driven by the belief that the Han had lost heaven's mandate and that a new era was dawning. The rebellion shook the empire. At its height, hundreds of thousands joined, overwhelming officials and threatening the capital itself. For a moment, it seemed the Han might collapse entirely under their pressure. But the dynasty fought back. Generals, including many who would later become famous in the era of the Three Kingdoms, crushed the rebels with brutal force. Villages were burned, leaders executed, followers scattered. The rebellion was suppressed, but not without leaving deep scars. The Yellow Turban Uprising revealed the fragility of the Han. It showed that beneath the appearance of strength, discontent simmered in millions of lives. Though the dynasty survived the immediate crisis, it emerged weakened, its authority questioned, its resources drained. The rebellion also marked a shift in imagination. People began to see the dynasty not as eternal, but as mortal, subject to the cycles of rise and fall. The belief in heaven's mandate cut both ways. It legitimized rulers, but it also empowered people to withdraw support when rulers lost virtue. Thus, the Yellow Turban Rebellion became not only a political event, but a symbol, the sign that the dynasty's end was approaching. After the Yellow Turban Rebellion, the Han never fully recovered. Power fragmented as generals and warlords gained increasing control, overshadowing the authority of the emperor. Eunuchs at court schemed for influence, while regional governors built private armies. The unity that had once been the empire's strength now dissolved into rivalry. Civil wars erupted. Factions fought not only against rebels, but against one another. Provinces that had once obeyed the capital now looked to local leaders. The emperor became more figurehead than ruler, his throne diminished by the ambitions of those around him. Amid this chaos, the ideals of Confucian governance seemed hollow. Virtue gave way to power struggles, learning to opportunism, harmony to division. For many, the dream of order gave way to the reality of survival. By the year 220 CE, the strain proved too great. The last Han emperor, Zhang, formally abdicated, and the dynasty came to an end. China fractured into the era known as the Three Kingdoms, a time of heroes and warlords, poets and generals, remembered both for its chaos and its stories. Yet even in its fall, the Han left an enduring imprint. Its name became the name of the people. Its institutions and culture continued to guide later dynasties. Its inventions, texts, and art lived on, and its decline carried lessons that even the strongest empires can falter when corruption, inequality, and division take root. The story of the Han's fall reminds us of the cycles of history. Just as the seasons turn, dynasties rise and fall, each leaving behind seeds for what comes next. The Han's decline was not an end, but a transformation, leading to new eras of struggle and creativity. And so, the Han lives on, not only in memory, but in the very identity of China, in the resilience of its culture, and in the quiet truth that even golden ages must one day yield to change. And as the Han gave way to the Three Kingdoms, China entered a time of division, yet also of legend, an age when history and myth intertwined. The fall of the Han dynasty in 220 CE did not bring peace. Instead, it ushered in one of the most dramatic and legendary eras in Chinese history, the Three Kingdoms. When the Han collapsed, its once unified empire shattered into competing realms. Regional warlords, who had risen during the dynasty's decline, now claimed power openly. Three states emerged as the strongest: Wei in the north, Shu in the west, and Wu in the south. Each had its own ruler, its own generals, and its own vision of legitimacy. Wei, the largest and most powerful, was ruled by Cao Cao, a brilliant but controversial figure. He was admired for his strategy, administration, and poetry, yet criticized for ruthlessness. Shu was led by Liu Bei, who claimed descent from the Han royal family. Known for his humility and compassion, he won the loyalty of many, by presenting himself as the defender of tradition. Wu, meanwhile, thrived under Sun Quan, who balanced diplomacy with military skill, securing his rule in the fertile lands of the Yangtze. This division created a century of warfare, alliances, betrayals, and shifting fortunes. But it also created legends. Generals like Zhuge Liang, famed for his wisdom and strategies, and Guan Yu, honored for his loyalty and bravery, became cultural icons, remembered not just as warriors, but as moral exemplars. The Three Kingdoms was more than politics. It was an age when history and myth intertwined. Battles were recorded in chronicles, but also retold in stories and songs, embroidered with drama, loyalty, and destiny. In later centuries, these tales would become the famous novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of China's literary masterpieces, ensuring that the age lived on in imagination as much as in fact. The fragmentation of the empire showed the fragility of unity, yet it also revealed the resilience of culture. Even amid chaos, values of loyalty, wisdom, and honor flourished, carried in the deeds of those who fought and dreamed. The Three Kingdoms period was alive with heroes and battles that captured the imagination. Its chronicles read like epics, filled with dramatic encounters, cunning strategies, and bonds of brotherhood. One of the most famous tales is the Oath of the Peach Garden. Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, three men of different backgrounds, swore brotherhood in a garden, pledging loyalty unto death. Their bond became a symbol of friendship and devotion, inspiring generations with the idea that honor and loyalty could outlast even empires. Battles during this era often became legendary. At the Battle of Red Cliffs, the forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan joined to confront Cao Cao, whose massive army threatened to dominate all of China. Outnumbered, the Allies used clever tactics, including fireships that set Cao Cao's fleet ablaze along the Yangtze River. The victory preserved the balance of power, ensuring the division into three kingdoms endured. Another towering figure was Zhuge Liang, the strategist of Shu. Known as the Sleeping Dragon, he was said to possess almost supernatural wisdom. His inventions, from clever military formations to the wooden ox, a kind of supply cart, and his calm foresight made him legendary. Even his defeats were remembered with respect, for he embodied the ideal of the wise minister, loyal unto death. Yet alongside glory came tragedy. Heroes often met untimely ends, cut down in battle or betrayed by circumstance. Guan Yu, revered for his loyalty, was captured and executed. Zhang Fei, bold and fierce, was slain by his own men. Even Liu Bei, the compassionate ruler, died with his dreams unfulfilled. Their stories remind us that even the greatest heroes are mortal, yet their virtues endure in memory. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, though written over 1,000 years later, immortalized these figures. It wove fact and legend into a tapestry of loyalty, betrayal, courage, and fate. To this day, statues of Guan Yu stand in temples as symbols of loyalty and protection. Zhuge Liang is remembered as the model of wisdom. The Three Kingdoms became less a time of war and more a timeless theater of values. Though filled with drama and heroism, the Three Kingdoms was ultimately a time of hardship. Wars devastated lands, families were displaced, and countless lives were lost. Yet in the grand arc of history, this age carried lessons that endured. First, it revealed the fragility of empires. The Han, which had seemed eternal, dissolved into fragments. No matter how strong a dynasty, internal corruption and division can bring even the greatest low. This truth echoed in later centuries, reminding rulers to guard not only their borders, but the trust of their people. Second, it showed the power of values amid chaos. Though kingdoms fought bitterly, the virtues celebrated in stories, loyalty, wisdom, courage, brotherhood, became guiding lights for generations. Even in division, Culture preserved ideals that gave people hope and identity. Third, it nurtured the imagination. The tales of this age became cultural treasures, told and retold through novels, operas, paintings, and modern dramas. They reminded people that history is not only about who won or lost, but about the spirit carried by those who lived it. By 280 CE, the three kingdoms came to an end. The kingdom of Wei, having absorbed Shu, was itself overtaken by the Jin dynasty, which reunified China. Yet the memory of the age lived on, greater than the dynasty that followed. Today, the three kingdoms remain one of the most beloved chapters of Chinese history. Its heroes are revered not as conquerors, but as symbols of enduring virtues. Its battles are remembered not only for strategy, but for the stories they carried. Its division, though painful, enriched the culture with legends that still inspire. The Age of Heroes teaches us that even in times of fragmentation, meaning can be found. Empires may fall, but the values of loyalty, wisdom, and brotherhood shine across centuries, guiding us like stars in a turbulent sky. And as China was reunited under new dynasties, the memory of the three kingdoms remained, while new philosophies, arts, and inventions shaped the path forward. For as long as humans have lived, they have searched for ways to heal, to ease pain, cure illness, and preserve life. In ancient China, this search became not only practical, but deeply philosophical, woven into the rhythms of nature and the balance of the cosmos. The earliest Chinese medicine was shaped by observation. Farmers noticed how plants affected animals. Hunters saw how wounds healed. Mothers learned which herbs soothed fever or calmed a child. Over centuries, these fragments of knowledge grew into a system, guided by reflection on the world itself. At the heart of Chinese healing lay the belief in qi, the vital energy that flows through all things. Health was not simply the absence of illness, it was the free and balanced flow of qi within the body. Just as rivers nourish fields, qi nourishes organs and tissues. When it flowed smoothly, life flourished. When blocked or imbalanced, sickness arose. This view connected human beings to the cosmos. The body was seen as a microcosm of the universe, subject to the same forces of yin and yang, the eternal opposites of dark and light, soft and hard, cold and warm. Health meant harmony between yin and yang, while disease reflected imbalance. The five elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, were also central. Each element was linked to organs, emotions, and cycles. The liver belonged to wood, the heart to fire, the spleen to earth, the lungs to metal, the kidneys to water. To diagnose illness was to trace how these elements interacted within the body, just as they interacted in nature. Thus, Chinese medicine was never separate from philosophy. It was rooted in the same patterns that shaped heavens, seasons, and society. To heal a body was to realign it with the Tao, the way of all things. Ancient Chinese medicine developed a wide range of practices and remedies, many of which endure to this day. One of the most distinctive was acupuncture. Practitioners believed that qi flowed along pathways called meridians, invisible channels connecting the organs. By inserting fine needles into specific points, they sought to restore the balance of qi, easing pain and correcting disharmony. To the outside eye, acupuncture may have seemed mysterious, but to those who practiced it, it was a precise and subtle art, honed through centuries of observation. Alongside acupuncture came moxibustion, the burning of dried mugwort near or on the skin, believed to warm and invigorate the flow of qi. Together, these practices addressed both coldness and stagnation in the body, harmonizing internal rhythms. Herbal medicine was another cornerstone. Ancient texts recorded hundreds of plants, roots, minerals, and animal products used for healing. Ginseng, valued for vitality, ginger for digestion and warmth, licorice root for harmony, cinnamon for circulation. Each substance was understood not only by its physical effects, but by its qualities of yin, yang, and elemental association. Recipes blended multiple ingredients, balancing their properties to target both symptoms and underlying imbalance. Massage and movement also played key roles. Techniques like tuina massage manipulated muscles, joints, and energy channels, easing tension and aiding recovery. Gentle exercises, precursors to qigong and tai chi, combined breath and motion to maintain health, aligning body and spirit with the Tao. Diet, too, was considered medicine. Foods were classified by temperature, flavor, and elemental quality. A balanced diet was not just nutrition but therapy, preventing illness and sustaining vitality. Even the timing of meals, linked to cycles of day and night, was part of this harmony. Doctors of the Han Dynasty and beyond compiled these practices into texts that became classics. The Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's inner canon, described the theory of qi, yin, and yang, and the elements, forming the foundation of traditional Chinese medicine. Its pages reveal a vision of healing that was at once practical and philosophical, empirical and mystical. Medicine in ancient China was not only about techniques, it was about the spirit of healing. A good physician was not simply skilled, but also compassionate, wise, and attuned to both people and nature. Doctors often emphasized the importance of prevention. To maintain health was better than to cure disease. This meant living in harmony with the seasons, balancing work and rest, and cultivating calmness of mind. Emotional states were seen as deeply connected to health, anger injuring the liver, joy uplifting the heart, worry weighing on the spleen, grief burdening the lungs, fear weakening the kidneys. Healing involved not only the body, but the emotions and spirit. The physician was sometimes compared to a gardener, nurturing the soil of life, pruning excess, watering what was dry, and ensuring balance. This metaphor reflected the Taoist influence. The healer did not force, but guided, aligning the patient with natural rhythms. Legends tell of doctors who embodied this spirit. One famous figure was Hua Tuo, a physician of the late Han period. He developed herbal anesthetics and surgical techniques far ahead of his time. Yet he was remembered not only for skill, but for humility and care. He treated emperors and peasants alike, always seeking to ease suffering. The role of healing extended beyond individuals to communities. Plagues and epidemics occasionally swept through villages, and healers were called to protect entire populations. Rituals, prayers, and offerings to ancestors and deities often accompanied practical remedies, reflecting the belief that illness could have both physical and spiritual causes. The legacy of these healing ways is profound. Many of the practices, acupuncture, herbal medicine, massage, breathing exercises, are still used today, not only in China but worldwide. They remind us of the depth of ancient wisdom and of the truth that health is more than mechanics. It is balance, harmony, and wholeness. The story of Chinese medicine is not only about remedies, but about a worldview, one that sees humans as part of nature, bodies as mirrors of the cosmos, and healing as a journey of alignment with the way. Even now, in the hum of modern hospitals and the pages of new science, echoes of this ancient vision remain, reminding us that the art of healing is as much about wisdom and compassion as it is about knowledge. And as medicine sought to balance the body, another realm of Chinese life sought balance as well, the family, seen as a universe in miniature. In ancient China, the family was more than a household. It was the very foundation of society. To understand the empire, one had first to understand the family, for the two were seen as reflections of one another. The Chinese word for family, jia, carried not only the sense of kinship but of continuity, roots, and order. Within its walls, daily rhythms unfolded, meals cooked, children taught, ancestors remembered. Yet these rhythms echoed larger patterns, for the family was imagined as a microcosm of the universe. At its heart was the value of filial piety, Xiao. Children were taught from their earliest years that respect for parents and elders was not merely kindness, but sacred duty. To honor one's parents was to honor the chain of life itself, the link between past, present, and future. Generations often lived under one roof. Grandparents, parents, children, sometimes great-grandchildren, all shared the same home, each with roles defined by age and status. Elders guided decisions, passed down wisdom, and carried memory. Parents worked and disciplined, ensuring survival. Children obeyed and learned, preparing to continue the lineage. But the family was more than hierarchy. It was also a system of balance and harmony. Just as yin and yang balanced one another, so too did the roles within the household. Men and women, elders and youth, authority and obedience. Each complemented the other, creating wholeness when aligned with virtue. This vision of family shaped all of society. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, ruling as the father of the empire. Officials were seen as elder brothers, guiding younger siblings. The state itself was imagined as one vast household, where loyalty to ruler mirrored loyalty to father. Thus, the family was not private alone. It was the blueprint for governance, morality, and cosmic order. The centrality of family was most visible in its rituals. For ancient Chinese, these were not empty ceremonies, but lifelines that bound generations together and connected the living with the dead. Ancestor worship was one of the deepest practices. Families kept altars within their homes, with tablets inscribed with the names of the departed. Offerings of food, incense, and wine were made, honoring those who had come before. To remember ancestors was to affirm that life did not end with death, but continued in presence and influence. Seasonal festivals amplified these bonds. During the Qingming festival, families visited graves, cleaned them, and offered food, ensuring ancestors were cared for. In the Double Ninth festival, families climbed hills together, honoring both elders and the endurance of lineage. These acts of remembrance kept the threads of continuity strong. Marriage, too, was steeped in ritual. It was not simply a union of two individuals, but of two families, ensuring the continuation of lineage and the strengthening of community ties. Elaborate ceremonies involved offerings, vows, music, and feasts, weaving the couple into the larger fabric of kinship. Daily rituals also shaped harmony. Meals were eaten in order of age, with elders served first. Children bowed in respect each morning. Words of guidance were offered in evenings. These simple rhythms reinforced structure, reminding each member of their place in the universe. The influence of Confucianism deepened these practices. Confucius taught that filial piety was the root of virtue, that if each person fulfilled their role within the family with respect and care, harmony would ripple outward into society. The household was both school and temple, teaching obedience, compassion, and responsibility. Yet within this structure was tenderness. Love between parent and child, devotion between siblings, companionship between husband and wife, these gave warmth to ritual. The formality of bows and offerings was not coldness, but reverence, a way of expressing what words alone could not hold. Through rituals, ancestors and living were bound together, generations became one, and the household became a mirror of heaven and earth. To the ancient Chinese, the family was not only social but cosmic. Its structure was imagined as reflecting the very order of the universe. The father, guiding and providing, was likened to heaven, yang, bright, protective. The mother, nurturing and grounding, was likened to earth, yin, receptive, sustaining. Children were like the myriad beings that filled the world, growing under the balance of heaven and earth. In this view, every act within the family carried cosmic significance. To respect one's parents was to align with heaven's will. To care for children was to participate in the cycle of creation. To keep harmony in the household was to echo harmony in the universe. This vision gave meaning to the smallest gestures. A bow to an elder was a bow to the order of the cosmos. A shared meal was communion not only with family, but with the flow of heaven and earth. Even quarrels, when resolved, were seen as restoring cosmic balance. The family also provided resilience in times of turmoil. When dynasties fell, when wars tore the land, families endured. Ancestors still received offerings, children were still raised, rituals still performed. The empire could fracture, but the household carried on, preserving culture, values, and identity. Legends and proverbs reflected this centrality. Stories told of sons who sacrificed for parents, of daughters who endured hardship for the sake of family honor. These tales, passed through generations, taught that virtue began at home. The endurance of this vision is evident even today. Across centuries, Chinese culture has held family as its heart, shaping not only private life, but national identity. To this day, family ties, respect for elders, and remembrance of ancestors remain pillars of meaning. The family as universe teaches us a lesson that transcends time, that we are not isolated individuals, but part of larger patterns of belonging. Each of us is both child and ancestor, receiver and giver, shaped by those before us and shaping those to come. And so, the family is not only the root of society, but the root of life itself, a reminder that the universe is not distant, but present in the bonds we hold each day. And beyond family, China also looked outward to its neighbors and distant lands, weaving itself into the wider world. China, vast and fertile, often seemed like a world unto itself. Its rivers, mountains, and plains provided abundance, while its dynasties crafted order and culture. Yet China was never truly alone. Beyond its borders lived peoples, kingdoms, and cultures whose presence shaped its history. To the north stretched the steppes, home to nomadic tribes, the Xiongnu, the Donghu, and others, who moved with the seasons, their herds, their wealth. They were fierce riders, skilled with bow and horse, swift as the winds. For the settled Chinese, these nomads were both threat and fascination. They raided farmlands, yet also traded horses, furs, and precious goods. Relations shifted like the seasons, sometimes war, sometimes uneasy alliance, sometimes exchange of gifts and brides. To the south lay forests and rivers, home to diverse peoples in what is now Vietnam and southern China. Their cultures were rich in their own ways, with different languages, customs, and deities. Chinese dynasties sought to extend influence here, sending armies and administrators, yet also absorbing new crops, music, and ideas. To the west rose mountains and deserts leading toward Central Asia. Here lay oasis kingdoms like Khotan and Dunhuang, whose survival depended on trade routes. They became cultural crossroads, blending Chinese, Indian, Persian, and nomadic influences. Contact with these neighbors was not merely political, it was also cultural and spiritual. The Chinese learned of new foods like grapes and pomegranates from the west, or gained hardy horses from the steppes. In return, silk, jade, and ideas flowed outward. Borders were not rigid walls, but membranes through which life passed. The vision of China as the Middle Kingdom, central under heaven, surrounded by others, guided diplomacy. Foreign rulers often sent tribute, acknowledging China's central role. Yet in truth, influence was mutual. Every border was also a meeting place, where difference became dialogue. The most famous link between China and the wider world was the Silk Road, that web of trade routes stretching across Asia. Already explored in earlier chapters, here it reappears as a reminder of how deeply China was woven into global exchange. From China traveled silk, lacquer, paper, and porcelain. Into China came glass from Rome, spices from India, silver from Persia, and music from many lands. Merchants, monks, and envoys moved along these paths, carrying goods but also stories, beliefs, and dreams. One of the most transformative arrivals was Buddhism. From India, monks journeyed through Central Asia into China, bringing teachings of compassion, meditation, and enlightenment. At first strange, these ideas gradually blended with Chinese thought, reshaping art, philosophy, and daily practice. Monasteries sprang up, their statues and murals filling caves like those at Dunhuang with visions of the Buddha's world. Diplomatic exchanges also marked these centuries. The Han sent envoys westward, seeking alliances against nomads and opening paths of trade. Roman coins have been found in Chinese soil, hinting at indirect contact between the two great empires. Though separated by vast distances, their goods and stories brushed against one another. To the south, maritime routes expanded. Ships sailed from ports along the South China Sea, reaching Southeast Asia and beyond to India. These sea routes carried silk and porcelain outward, and spices, pearls, and exotic animals inward. The ocean became another road, a highway of waves. These exchanges enriched Chinese life. Grapes, cucumbers, and walnuts became part of diet. Foreign music and instruments colored festivals. New ideas expanded imagination. The world was larger than rivers and mountains. It was a tapestry of lands connected by courage and curiosity. The Silk Road and sea routes remind us that no culture is sealed. Every civilization, however proud, breathes with the winds of others. For ancient China, contact with the outer world brought both opportunity and challenge. It tested how the empire saw itself and how it related to difference. The idea of the mandate of heaven shaped this view. Rulers believed they governed not only by power, but by divine order. This gave them confidence in treating China as the center of civilization, the Middle Kingdom. Foreign peoples, seen as less cultivated, were invited into this order through tribute and exchange. Yet beneath this vision of centrality, China absorbed more than it admitted. Every contact left traces: foods, beliefs, technologies, even ways of seeing. The paradox of Chinese history is this: it often saw itself as self-sufficient, yet it was always enriched by others. Buddhism, once foreign, became deeply Chinese. Horses from Central Asia transformed warfare. Spices and fruits changed cuisine. Ideas of astrology and medicine crossed borders, blending into new insights. At times, contact brought danger. Nomadic invasions toppled dynasties, forcing adaptation. Yet even conquerors, once settled, often adopted Chinese ways, wearing its clothes, speaking its language, ruling by its philosophies. The outer world tested China, but also affirmed its resilience. What emerges is a picture of interconnection. China was not isolated behind walls. It was part of a wider human story, linked by roads, seas, and imagination. Its greatness lay not only in inward cultivation, but in outward exchange. This truth carries lessons. Just as the family was seen as a universe in miniature, so the world itself can be seen as one great family of nations. Boundaries and differences remain, yet exchange brings growth. Cultures meet, influence one another, and weave a fabric stronger than any single thread. As China's dynasties rose and fell, its contact with the outer world continued, shaping and being shaped in turn. Today, when we look back, we see not an isolated civilization, but a participant in the eternal dialogue of humanity. And as we near the end of this journey, we return to the image of the river, flowing from ancient times to now, carrying the story of China itself. From the banks of the Yellow River, where early farmers planted millet and built simple homes, to the grandeur of dynasties, to the songs of poets and the wisdom of sages, the story of ancient China is like a great river. It begins in small streams, gathering strength as it flows. The Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, early ripples of organization, belief, and ritual. Then the torrents of Qin, swift and forceful, uniting all under one rule. The calm, steady current of Han, nourishing culture, invention, and connection. Alongside, the tributaries, Taoist sages whispering of harmony, Confucian teachers guiding with virtue, alchemists dreaming of immortality, families binding themselves as universes in miniature. This river carried wars and rebellions too, the Yellow Turban Uprising, the chaos of the Three Kingdoms. Yet even turmoil became part of the flow, teaching resilience, reshaping the banks, guiding the waters toward new courses. Through it all, the river endured. Like the Yellow and Yangtze, it bent, it swelled, it flooded, but it never ceased. The civilizations of China lived and changed, yet their essence flowed forward, carrying memory and meaning. To stand at the shore of this river is to feel time itself. Dynasties rise and fall like waves, but the current continues. It carries the songs of ancient flutes, the brush strokes of calligraphy, the rhythm of footsteps along the Silk Road. It carries the laughter of children in courtyards, the silence of sages on mountain tops, the chants of monks in temples. In this river, past and present merge. It reminds us that history is not gone, but flowing within us, shaping the lands we walk and the dreams we hold. What lessons flow to us from this river of ancient China? One is the lesson of balance, from yin and yang, from Taoist harmony, from the rhythms of medicine and family. We learn that life flourishes not through extremes, but through equilibrium. To live is to balance strength with gentleness, action with stillness, ambition with humility. Another is the lesson of continuity. Ancestor worship taught that the past is never lost, it lives within us. The Han showed that unity can be preserved not only by law, but by culture. The family revealed that generations are linked, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. In remembering these truths, we too find roots that steady us. A third lesson is the value of connection. The Silk Road reminds us that no people stands alone. Goods, ideas, and beliefs traveled across mountains and deserts, showing that humanity is a web, not a collection of islands. China's greatness lay not only in its inward cultivation, but in its openness to exchange. There is also the lesson of impermanence. Even golden ages end. The Han fell, the Qin lasted only a breath, the Three Kingdoms brought division. Yet impermanence is not loss, but change. Like a river, history flows on, carrying forward what endures, washing away what cannot remain. This teaches us resilience, that endings are also beginnings. Finally, there is the lesson of wisdom in the ordinary. In the jade hairpin, the painted mirror, the shared meal, the morning bow, beauty was found in daily life. Civilization is not built only in palaces and wars, but in families, rituals, and small acts of care. These lessons flow quietly, like water around stones. They whisper that strength is not domination, but harmony, that immortality is not in elixirs, but in the endurance of values, that history is not distant, but alive in our present choices. As we reach the end of our journey, let us return once more to the river. Picture it at dusk. The surface glows with the colors of sunset, gold, crimson, violet. Along its banks stand farmers returning from fields, children chasing one another, elders watching with quiet smiles. In the distance, mountains rise, their peaks softened by mist. The river flows past all of them, as it has for thousands of years. It whispers of dynasties long gone, of emperors and sages, of rebellions and dreams. It carries their stories not as noise, but as gentle echoes, blending into the song of eternity. The river tells us that civilizations are like currents. They come together, they separate, they join again, but always they move. China's story, like water, is never still. It adapts, it endures, it reflects the sky even as it shapes the earth. And as we listen to this river, we realize we too are part of it. Each of us is carried by the current of history, shaped by those who came before, shaping those who will follow. Our lives are brief ripples, yet together they form the endless flow. So let us take from this journey not only knowledge of ancient China, but a sense of calm, of connection, of belonging to a greater whole. The river flows within us, reminding us that time is both fleeting and eternal, that life is both fragile and enduring. And as this chapter closes, we arrive at the universal truth that history, like rivers, carries us always forward, yet invites us to pause, to listen, to rest by its banks. As our journey comes to a close, may you carry with you the quiet lessons of the past, balance, resilience, and the beauty found in everyday life. If this story has brought you calm or sparked wonder, I invite you to share your presence. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from, or the time showing on your clock as you drift into rest. And if there's a civilization or forgotten story you'd love us to explore next, your voice will help guide the path ahead. For more journeys into the ancient world, subscribe and stay with us. Each story, another gentle step into the timeless fabric of history. Until we meet again, may peace surround you, and may the whispers of the past carry you softly into sleep.